All right. I believe, Keith, you are up first.
Yeah, hopefully it shouldn't take long. So I was looking at one of these Istio issues here, 4680, around an issue with destination rule TLS mode symbols. Um, Looks like there was some issues with ALPN when the user wants to use simple TLS mode, and so seemed like a couple of John about it. Seemed like a pretty straightforward fix here. In our conversation, we John Travis as regression, but because one was my first Istio design doc, and because it's around ALPN, which has the potential to mess up a lot of things, I wrote up a pretty quick doc about describing the problem, describing the approaches, a couple of approaches you can take with one proposal, which would be to simply treat what happens here as a regression and to change the behavior. So put the fix simply, basically, even when the user says, "Hey, I want to use simple TLS mode, don't do in TLS here," we still like Istio still sends ALCN headers in the request. So in order to prevent this from breaking things, because when the ALPN is sent over, the server envoy says, "Hey, where's my certificate?" It errors. To fix this, you should just not send ALPN when the user specifies a simple TLS mode. So just focusing in the background here. I could keep this proposal small and go back to time to be clear. And I think that the proposal makes general sense. I've got one LPTN from John. I think the bar is two from the networking receiver. So I just wanted to talk more about it here. Oops, here in the minutes.
It's come through, but it just has static and garble in.
That's really strange. Audio is really ugly. One second. Can anybody hear now?
Yep, loud and clear.
Awesome. Okay, I'll try to summarize that now that my audio is clear. Basically, there's a bug about ALPN, and because ALPN is complex, I wanted to make sure folks knew about it. John gave me an LGTM, but wanted to let the folks here in the greater community know. Basically, the issue is that for simple TLS mode, when we send we've got that configured. The client envoy still sends ALPN headers in that initial handshake, and that tells the server envoy to expect a client certificate, which there is none because simple TLS mode is configured on the destination rule. So that leads to an error, and that's described. There's actually a pretty good repro that the person who created the issue attached to issue 4680. So I played with that confirmed issue and wrote this quick design doc. What I'm proposing is essentially to make it so that a simple TLS mode implies no ALPM on the client side. What John tells me, this was the behavior in Istio 1.14 or pre-Istio 1.14. This was a regression, so just hoping to fix that and move it to the expected behavior. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Happy to answer any questions here or in the doc. Go ahead, Marco.
Yeah, just a quick question. The bug only exists in the filter, or like there was a European field in the envoy.
I'm here.
Does it use that, or can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. Does the filter use the European field in the envoy, or
Am I still muted?
related?
No, Lucas, I can hear you.
Awesome. So what was the question?
Yeah. So the question is the only in the filter, and does it have anything related to the usage of the envoy field, the ALPM field? Istio will set the field based on the cluster entry.
I'm not familiar with that field, to be honest.
I think what you're describing, Marco, is the filter chain match that Envoy does based on the LPM and the initial in the handshake. The way this works is that if there's an NTLS connection being initiated on the client side, if the client side says, hey, I want to do NTLS, then the Envoy, there's a special Istio ALPM filter that will prefix the actual ALPN headers like H2, HTTP 1.1, etc. Prefix it with Istio before sending that request out, and then the server Envoy will match based on those Istio prefixed ALPN headers. And if it finds those Istio prefixed headers, then that server Envoy will attempt to terminate TLS. Does that answer your question about the fields in use?
Not really. I'll check your doc and see if that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay. No problem. Any other questions? All right. If someone has a question or they just haven't had to read the doc, just leave a comment. Now I'll get back to you. I think I'm looking for one other networking working group sign off and approval on the doc before moving to implementation. So yeah, looking for that so I can get started fixing this. Thanks all.
Can you, sorry, this is a lot of information trying to digest. Keith, can you summarize which options are you proposing? Is it the simple TLS mode in the destination rule while user would specify simple as the mode?
Yeah, so as far as, so yes, this entire proposal, this entire doc is dealing with a particular case when the user has specified simple TLS mode in the destination rule. The option they're proposing to fix the bug, yeah, sorry, this is a pretty complex issue. The option I'm suggesting to fix the bug that we're seeing, again, only simple TLS mode, are either to do it transparently, so to just change the behavior so that simple TLS mode does not rewrite the ALPN headers. I go into how that happens in the doc. But essentially, if a simple TLS mode is set, then the Istio ALPN filter will be a no-op and it won't change the ALPN headers. Or another option that I thought about kind of as a devil's advocate is that we could put an annotation on service or something else. I chose service because it felt even more wrong to put something like ALPN inside destination rule because LLPN is a implementation detail about how MTLS is done and didn't feel like it belonged in the API. But I listed several reasons why putting an annotation on service is probably not desirable, and propose instead to just transparently set a simple TLS mode, signals no client-side ALPN.
Okay, got it. And with that proposed option, there is no change to existing Istio API, right? Because today we already support this mode and simple was an option.
Correct, correct. This is just modifying the implementation of the simple TLS node.
Okay, got it. Thanks. Thanks for that clarification. Yeah, I think that seems reasonable. I do like it better than annotation on service.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Francis, I think I'll turn it back over to you if there are no other questions.
Okay. Let's see. So, John, Kubernetes controllers.
I'll go last. It's not important at all.
Okay. Well then, Fasila. She
Hi,
on?
yes, so there was one issue in the Slack about people not having permission to save the RFCs in the shared Google Drive. So I do not know. Previously, Craig used to handle it, I guess, when he was in Google. So now we do not know who can handle or who can allow the permission.
What is the? Let's see. I should be able to take care of this. So, Fasila, I'll follow up with you offline.
Okay,
Is
sure.
this the right thread? Okay. And by RFCs, you mean documentation?
We save all of our design RFCs or even the documents, everything in the shared Google Drive. So looks like people are not having that access anymore. And usually somebody used to approve it from Google, I guess.
That may be one of those orphan things, right?
Just a little backstory on that, Francis. Its access is controlled by a particular Google group. And it sounds like that's the underlying issue. Who has the admin privileges to add people to that group?
Well, this would be one of those things that used to be Greg. I am not sure if I have admin permissions to that Google group, but there's bound to be a way to reclaim that. So I'll figure something out.
Also, we don't want to give everybody access to that, right? So the right permission, I think it's only for work group lead, maybe also for maintainers. I mean, I just want to set the expectation, right? Not everybody should have right permissions. I think read permission is fine. If people request that, that's okay, but not right permission, which I think Fasila, you're asking creating documents to save RFC. So yeah.
When I used to, when I was not a maintainer, when I used to write design document, we used to store it in the common place and ask for review comments, right? So we used to have that permission to at least put our documents there. Of course, we do not need any delete permission or anything, but RFCs used to be in that common place usually.
Yeah, in particular, this also governs the permission to comment on a document. And so what we've done in the past has just been to approve anyone who requested membership to the group. It's quite large, and we've not had problems up until now with anybody abusing those privileges. Obviously, if we did have difficulty with that, then we might need to be a little bit more judicious with who we allow in.
I'll just chime in and say that I also commented on the original Slack thread. My RFC that we just talked about is in my personal drive and not in the Istio Design Docs drive for this reason, because I don't have permission to move it into the drive. So it's not even just write, it's also move into the drive. So
Francis, I think the ask here is twofold. The first is the immediate, finding who owns this Google group and probably just bulk approving any outstanding requests for membership. The second part of it that you and Craig and I can follow up on in our meeting regarding migration to CNCF is bringing the drive and this group under the control of the community rather than that of Google.
Yeah, and just to clarify, sorry, Priscilla, I didn't know it was you asking for the permission. I thought it was some other people in the community. I have no issue for anybody on the call who participated in our weekly meetings to have right permission. Just didn't want that to be a random person.
Yeah, only people who wants to write some design document probably will do it. Yeah.
Yeah, which they would show up in these type of weekly meeting. Yeah.
Okay, like I said, I'll take an action item to figure this out. And so Mitch, in the past, anyone who requested access, does the group get notification that this is someone?
The group administrators do, which was like me, Sven, Louis, and Craig,
who have all left Google by now. This may be one of those things I have to go through the process and reclaim.
If you look in that thread on Slack, I think Craig linked to the tool inside Google for reclaiming. I think it's go/eggs
or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've already had to do that once. Anyways, I'll figure this out. Okay, so last but not least, John.
Yeah, 1 second. Let me share my screen. All right. Yeah, I just want to share something I've been kind of working on for, I don't know, a little while. This is not necessarily a proposal yet to change Istio, but it's something that could potentially turn into that eventually. So I've been writing obviously a lot of Kubernetes controllers in Istio for many years, but also a lot of new ones lately for Ambient and gateways and waypoints and all this stuff. And kind of what I found is that it's really hard. No one writes them correctly. That is me. That's everyone on this call. That's all the Kubernetes folks that are writing Kubernetes themselves. They all have tons of bugs in them. They're all really subtle. And they're also usually not optimized to the full extent. We're leaving a lot of performance on the table. And as we optimize it more and more, it gets worse and worse and more bugs and more complexity. So it's really quite a mess. And the most recent one was probably this for the workload resource type, which basically just converts a bunch of services, namespace, config maps, all these things, and kind of aggregates them into this workload API. And it's just super, super burdensome. Like it's all these indexes and caches that like we have to maintain. We have like constant bugs of like invalidation errors, things like that. So I started to think like, what can we do better? Well, actually, let me talk about more problems first, because we all love problems. Another problem too is like, if you look at the full end-to-end flow in Istio, like a normal basic Kubernetes controller that they show you on the Hello Worlds to like look great is like, oh, I read a replica set, I create a pod. It's very simple. Like the inputs and outputs are directly connected. Those controllers are generally okay. But for us, we read all of Kubernetes, and eventually our output is all of XDS, right? And there's this gigantic sandwich in the middle where at a very simplified level, we kind of take a bunch of things and then we kind of checkpoint it and we build like a cache. So like the first layer is our Kubernetes controller, which effectively we build all this cache of like the Kubernetes objects and then send an event that say, okay, like this little thing changed. And then we get to the next layer, push context. And it goes and pulls from the Kubernetes controller and says, okay, give me all this info because I got this event, and builds its own cache. And we say, okay, carry on. There was a service change. And then we go to the XDS generator. It's like, I need all this information. Let me fetch from the push context, right? So we have like all these intermediate caches, and it's very slow and inefficient. And it makes it really hard to understand what changes. Like in Kubernetes, it's kind of nice because you can just say like, does the pod exist? that's basically a free check because it's in your Informer cache probably. If not, create it. But in XDS, we don't know what the proxies are configured in XDS. We can't keep track of it for many reasons. And so we have to guess based on this one event that says something like service X changed, what XDS should I push? And that's where most of our bugs and most of our optimizations come from. But we still do a really bad job. Usually you change like some random label or annotation of service, you're pushing like, potentially gigabytes of information. Yeah, so I don't know. Any questions on why controllers suck? Cool. Let's see, some other things. I think I covered most of this. Just some more details about this. I guess one thing too is like the controllers aren't really composable. Like generally they only can take Kubernetes resources as inputs, and that's why we have kind of the mess of like this multi-tier caching and whatnot. So I kind of tried to look at how could we do better. And I came up with this idea for a kind of abstraction over controllers to kind of simplify writing them. And I think it's best shown with an example. So basically everything is around this idea of collections, which are very similar to informers, and they basically allow you to list or get resources and subscribe to changes to them. So we can, for example, let me see that. If we want to just watch a Kubernetes resource, that's trivial, right? We take basically a converter and slap like a abstraction layer on top of it, so that's no problem. But now we may want to, just like we could subscribe to config maps, maybe we want to subscribe to mesh config, which is derived from config maps, right? So we can basically build a derived collection that comes from the original Kubernetes ones. And this is actually real code. This compiles, well, it's at least 99% the same as the real code. So mesh config is built up of actually merging two different config maps. So we actually subscribe to these two config maps and fetch them, and then just merge them, and then return the mesh config. And the library is kind of responsible for two things under the hood. When we fetch these, we're actually declaring these as dependencies of mesh config. So if any of those config maps change, this function will be called again and recomputed. And then if the result changes, downstream subscribers to mesh config will be notified. So if I add some random annotation to this Istio config map, this function would be recomputed. Mesh config would be the same because we don't read annotations. And so it would stop there. If I had gone and actually changed a field, the new mesh config would have changed, and anyone that was subscribed to mesh config would also recompute. So like you can, well, yeah, basically like as changes come in, we'll build like kind of a huge tree of dependencies, and changes will kind of propagate down the tree only as far as they're needed. So, a small change to an annotation today may push a bunch of XDS. If we had the entire set of Istio, which is why I'm not proposing we do this, because it's like, I'm not proposing rewrite yet until we're like crazy confident in this, like it would go down maybe a few levels, and then we'd realize, okay, nothing that we actually care about is changing anymore. We'll short circuit it and not actually send to XDS. One thing I mentioned too on performance is like, anything that we're doing in Istio is usually cheaper than sending over XDS. So it's worth doing a lot of effort to like do these diffs and whatnot in order to skip sending to XDS. So it may be slightly more, like it's fairly computationally expensive to compare objects, right? But I think for most cases, for well-written controllers, it should be better. So for a more complicated example, I talked about the workloads earlier. This is a simplified version of it because it's mostly business logic, but it's actually, the real one's only like 15 lines longer. You can, I can send the code if you want. I have them basically fork with this that I've been playing around with. So we already talked about you can, do informers. So I built a bunch of informers for some other things we need. And then basically we're now deriving workload. So in mesh config, it was a bit of a special case because there's one object. It's like a singleton. For workloads, we're actually saying we're going to take each pod, and for each pod, we're going to build a workload. So we kind of have this one-to-one relationship. And then we can also have these secondary dependencies. So, okay, for each pod, in order to build a workload, I also need to know some info from mesh config. So I fetch that. I also need to know services. So I'm going to fetch those. But I don't need all the services, right? I only need the services that select that pod. And so we have the ability to filter these. And this filter does two things. One, it makes sure that in my code, I'm only getting the services I care about. But it's also filtering what I'm subscribing to. So if some service that doesn't select my pod changes, I don't even have to rerun this function, right? And it short circuits. Let's see, we also fetch the namespace, we do a little bit of computation, and then we just return a workload. If we wanted to, so in the real code, we don't apply workloads to the cluster like we use them to send to XDS, but it's common for controllers to actually write to a cluster. And then you need to kind of reconcile, like, okay, the object changed, should reapply my changes. So we can actually also subscribe to the live workloads in the cluster, just using another informer. And then we can just have a function that takes these two collections and like keeps them in sync by with server-side apply. So like it can actually be just this simple one line because there's a common idea of, you know, two different streams, and you use server-side apply to synchronize them. And yeah, I think there should be an index too. Maybe I didn't talk about it here. But yeah, one other one as well is like in downstream parts of the code, we actually want to fetch these workloads not just by their key, which the key is their IP address, but also by the service. So we can also build indexes over things, which is like very simple. Just say a function that returns some keys, and then we have an alternate key that we can then look up by. So I think that covers it. Yeah, that's kind of the idea. I also thought we could actually use the code to like build these trees for debugging automatically, so you can kind of visualize what's going on. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, I'm not pitching that we do this in Istio for real. Just some ideas I'm exploring and figured I'd share with people.
Have you actually perf tested it all? Because like, yeah, this looks a lot like something sort of like, I guess, a React state store kind of dealy bob, right? And it does, like you're saying, get rid of the XDS penalty, and it would remove a lot of the need for caches and cache busting and crap that we're doing today. But like, I guess the other thing is like, yeah, have you actually tried it to see like what kind of performance it might give? Because I could see there might be edge cases where it might be a little weird or crazy.
So I have tried it because like I have implemented most of this, not all of it. Some of it's a little hand wavy right now. Yeah. But I haven't performance tested. No, I think the performance right now is probably not amazing, but I think it can probably be optimized a bit. I'm not sure. I mean, I have the same hesitation.
Yeah,
like it might be problematic.
Well, I think the advantage here is that if we have one framework for doing this, then performance improvements can be implemented once rather than in the 9 different caching layers or whatever it is that we currently support today.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually one of the huge benefits, I think. Like I talked about like, oh, we can just like write some code to build a diagram like this. Like we just do that once. And then we can do other things too, like, oh, maybe we decide like these services are not copies, but you shouldn't mutate them anyways for performance reasons, which I think is actually true in the implementation and in most controllers. Well, we could actually go run this function. Like if we say this function must be idempotent, we can just go run it a bunch of times and like check if they change things, check if the result's the same. Like we can do all sorts of kind of debugging assisted things by the fact that we have like a common framework to work with, right? And not to mention things like logs and metrics, and that's kind of table stakes.
Also, status and analysis messages, I think, could be greatly improved with this framework.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, so this, John, you chatted about this a little bit. Thinking through this, having thought through this a little bit, this feels like possibly, in a good way, an abuse of the informer model. I don't know, you know, is there any concern that the informer primitive with watches isn't, like, we run up against some of the limitations of the informer model? We're maybe doing things that weren't intended with it. Okay, so another way of asking the question is, have you like chatted with anybody from like SIG API machinery or architecture about this model and some of the diffing specifically, because that's coming from kind of a React world in the past life. That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, so I would say I did send this to one person. I don't know if you read it, but he at least opened the doc, Antoine. So I'm not sure. I will say as well, like we can add options. Like if the expensive part is diffing, we could have them, options to collection. Say, okay, on this one, the diff is actually more expensive than just always propagating the change. Don't bother diffing, and just always if this function is called, propagate it downstream. So I think there's some options there. But I will say like these informers, like trans shim is like each there's 3 functions in the interface, the collection, and these are just direct pass-through to the informer. So these are really not modifying informers. They're just providing a common interface so that we can make non-Kubernetes things informers too.
I like that. That's awesome.
All right. Well, I hope that everyone else can now suffer with me that this is useful enough that I never want to write a controller any other way, but not useful enough that it's ready and can be used. So now everything just sucks when we have to implement stuff. So you're all welcome. If any other questions, or I can stop sharing. Sounds like there's nothing else, so we can have 25 minutes back.
Hey, John, can you add the link to your doc to the notes?
I can probably add it. Right now, this is just internal.
I
there's
see.
no reason for it to be internal, but it's just easier to make it internal. But yeah, I'll share it afterwards and put it on there. Also, the code is public too. I can post a link to that, but it's not good code, just to be clear. It's like just kind of hacked together. But.
So do you think you could finish the Istio rewrite by like next week, or will it take 2?
I don't know. We'll see. I have been like in testing it. I've been kind of rewriting parts of it in the new model to validate that it works. So I've gotten the workload part and the waypoint controller, except the waypoint one doesn't work because Kubernetes bugs. But that's why I was talking to Antoine. Hopefully he fixes those. And then we can actually have that one line synchronizer. As well to do some manual actions. So. All right. Yeah, that's all for me. I don't think there's anything else on the agenda.
Nope, I believe that is everything.
I'll give a quick plug to what was already listed on last week's agenda. This Friday is the last day to submit. No, sorry, this Sunday is the last day to submit proposals for Istio Day Europe. We are on the short side for proposals right now, which means that you have a high probability of getting accepted. If you submit, it's going to be a half-day event on April 18th in Amsterdam, and also approved proposals will get free tickets to KubeCon, which is nice value too. So if you have interesting use cases, cool features, new controller frameworks with complete rewrites of Istio D, please submit them to the CFP there.
Would you accept a talk on Kubernetes controllers for Istio Day?
I mean, right now we're looking at 100% accept rate if nobody else applies. I mean, I'm sure other proposals will come in, but yeah, that could be.
All right, I'll submit it. Why not?
It is Amsterdam, right? This year.
It is. That's correct.
Mitch, you have to also mention that even if the doc proposal is accepted for Istio Day, you get a full free KubeCon pass for all the 4 days.
Yep. Yeah, not just Istio Day, but the full 4-day conference.
Okay, if there is nothing else, let's all get 20 minutes back. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.